Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, Assalamualaikum, Jiayanu, Pakhairagale, Ni Hao, Chunashumme, Washmale, Ohio Gozaimis, Guten Morgen, Ola, Bonjour, Privyet, Kaifa hal, Halishuma Chatore, Ahlan Wasalan Marhaba, Buna, Mucho, Gracias, Suavi, Abhalli Kare Aya, Hosh Galdin and Ayo Sayo, and thank you very much everybody for tuning into PTV World. You're watching World this morning. I happen to be Shahzad Hassan Khan, and with me, my very well-learned colleague, who happens to be Miss Haja Sati. Hello, Haja. How are you doing today?
Assalamu alaikum, Yunan. Thank you so much for introducing me. So, Shahzad, yesterday our foreign minister went with the ambassadors to the flood-stricken areas, where he had the aerial view and where he assessed the situation on the ground. And I'm so glad that, our foreign minister is doing that. Our political leadership is on the ground, interacting with the people, going out and reaching out to the flood-affected people so that they do not feel, left out. And, by taking the ambassadors of the different countries with him, I think this projection, I think the state really wants to say this thing, which is also the voice of the global south, is that we need resources beyond the pledges and promises, which is very much important because we do not brought this catastrophe. As of we are now speaking, this is the 8th monsoon cycle, which is currently lashing the entire country. And the projections are that there's more cycle coming in and there's more heavy rain is coming in. And as a very aptly our climate change minister, Mrs. Sherry Rahman, pointed out that these are the monster monsoons. We never seen the scale, this sort of scale, and I think that it might happen that, next year it can be worse when it comes to that. If we do not take actions for that matter, if we do not bring up more resiliency in our country, and I think it's also the responsibility of the global north, of the entire world, to help us out, to look over this matter and do not, just rub it under the carpet, by pointing out this report and that commission and stuff like that. I think we need to walk the talk more than that.
Exactly, and not just that. I believe that, that the actions will definitely translate the intent and will of the international community. Because, we very commonly use this proverb where we say that, action speaks louder than words. I believe in it. Now, it is true that, global leaders are coming together by saying that it's not a man-made or a Pakistan-made a catastrophe, but eventually it is a role played by the global community as well, because when we talk about carbon emissions, fossil fuels and all of these, well, Pakistan is not even a major contributor. In fact, we're not even a contributor, so imagine for somebody whose contribution is 0.01 or 0.02, that is a question mark, and it's because that we certainly do not have any industry over here which is kind of on a very progressive manner. But now imagine that if I take you back in time, whenever we have been talking about all of those, for example, Kyoto Protocol and all of these protocols which have been going on, and this COP which took place too. So imagine that, when Trump came into power, Trump said that, hey, what, we are going to continue to industrialize United States of America rather than thinking about the rest of the world. So I believe that it is a kind of a selfish behavior, but since, we do have a lot of global commons, and we really need to make sure that with all of these global commons, we look after the people who surround you, may be your neighboring country as well. So imagine for all of those countries who have been kind of adding on to the fossil fuel burning or the carbon emissions, they really need to be wise over here. But what can be done is something I would certainly want to ask you, that imagine that, superpowers like United States of America and all the other countries who have been contributing to these emissions, what do you think Pakistan can do until and unless the international community comes together?
I think it's really, really important that, we as a global south should become united, and we have, because, yesterday you shared Fiji Prime Minister, who also happens to be the part of the global south, and he very categorically said that it is not Pakistan's responsibility or fault when it comes to such sort of torrential rains. And before these rains, we had gloves, we had 17 incidents of gloves. So, Shahzad, we are living in a country which has Himalayas, right? And these are called the third pole because of the excessive amount of the ice or snow that they contain, right? When they are melting, obviously we are going to be affected because, that water will come down and we are in the way of that water, right? So it's really important that we make our voices felt and we, move the global resources beyond the pledges, beyond the promises, because, this is what we need right now. And this is coming from a very personal tone because our people are affected by that, Every day we see the calamity, every day we see that how people are affected, how they have been so much, their condition is deteriorated because of this. So, we need to move these resources,
and people should be held accountable, or nations should be held accountable too as well. This is something very important. But our today's program will entirely be dedicated to what actually happened, how are the conditions, whether the rescue operation is over, whether we're moving towards rehabilitation. But before we do that, let's get started with the top stories. So what do you have for our audiences out there in 46 different countries?
Okay, so today the first death anniversary of veteran Kashmiri separatist leader and former chief of the All Parties Hurriyat Conference, Sayyid Ali Gilani, is being observed today. Last year, on 1st of September, Indian authorities imposed a strict security clampdown in the occupied Kashmir shortly after Gilani's death. Police then went on to his home and seized his body, denying his family proper time to say their farewells. During his lifetime, Gilani has expressed a desire to be buried in the Martyrs' graveyard in Srinagar, but Indian authorities knew that such a burial would not be accompanied by the procession of his supporters marching with his body. So they buried him in the haste, in the cover of the darkness, with only a couple of close relatives in the attendance. He was a very nice personality, inspiring deep loyalty within his supporters and attracting strong critiques from opponents, and which happens to be Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, because of course they are clamping down. There is no concept of the human rights over there, and he was an uncompromising Kashmiri leader, that I would say. And now complete shutdown strike is observed in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir to pay tributes to the veteran Hurriyat leader. I think it's very important that we do not forget what our Kashmiri brethren have been going on, because I think we do feel very deeply about people who are in distress, people who need our support, because we can deeply feel their pain.
Exactly. And now moving on, I have been talking about it, and it's because of the fact that I've seen him deliver to the nation. Now imagine talking about our own Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Mian Mohammad Shahbaz Sharif Saab, has always had this heart. He always has this heart, where he wants to do good for the nation. So imagine that, when the flood actually hit Pakistan, now Prime Minister Mian Mohammad Shahbaz Sharif Saab has actually announced that it's going to be a 10 billion rupee flood relief package for the people who have been affected by flood. And not just that, the Prime Minister visited several flood-hit areas of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and met with the local people and tourists too. Now imagine, what I liked was that, while our Prime Minister was in Qatar, he actually cut short his trip, came back home to Pakistan and made sure that he's going to be alongside all of those people who've been hit by the flood. And this is something what you need in your leader. This is something which you need in somebody who actually happens to be the Prime Minister. So this pain who he has felt for the people of Pakistan, we, sir, pay rich tribute to you and to your entire team, that you've been on ground and you've been making sure that there's national cohesion, on a larger scale, where nobody is point scoring. I think it is because of your vision that, alhamdulillah, we're moving in the right direction. But now what we really need to do is that we really need to take a close look as in what happened from the north to the south of Pakistan when we talk about floods. Let's go. Let's take a look.
The National Disaster Management Authority, leading the response in coordinating assessments and directing humanitarian relief to the affected people, declared 72 out of the country's 160 districts as calamity hit in its latest situation report. The NDMA noted that at least 1 million homes, 162 bridges, and nearly 3,500 kilometers of roads have been damaged or destroyed across the South Asian nation. The flooding has also killed more than 800,000 farm animals and damaged vital farmlands and crops. Authorities and humanitarian groups are responding to the worst floods Pakistan has experienced in decades, as the devastation has impacted some 33 million people and led to the deaths of almost 1,200 others over the past 2 months. A joint launch of 2022 Pakistan Floods Response Plan by Government of Pakistan and the United Nations focuses on the needs of 5.2 million people, with life-saving response activities amounting to $160.3 million, covering food security, assistance for agriculture and livestock, shelter and non-food items. Climate Change Minister Sherry Rahman said 1/3 of Pakistan, a country of about 220 million people, was underwater, creating a crisis of unimaginable proportions since June, when the monsoon season rainfall began. U.S., through the U.S. Agency for International Development, announced an additional $30 million in life-saving humanitarian assistance to support people and communities affected by severe flooding in Pakistan. Cargo planes from Turkey and the United Arab Emirates began the international rush to assist. Canada announced $5 million, while Australian Foreign Minister announced $2 million to Pakistan in urgent humanitarian assistance. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has thanked Chinese President Xi Jinping for extending financial assistance to the flood-affected people of Pakistan. Rehabilitation of Flood Victim Relief Fund has been activated in order to enable the people at home and abroad to voluntarily contribute to the relief and rehabilitation activities. Donations can be deposited in account number G12164. The Pakistan Army has also accelerated its relief efforts for flood victims. Army Flood Relief Coordination Center has been established under the Army Air Defense Command with a mandate to coordinate rescue and relief efforts in synchronization with stakeholders at the Army level. Relief camps have been established across all affected areas of the country, whereas food, medical aid, and other relief items were being provided to affected people in the camps.
And at this point of time, I believe that it's really important that we as a nation thanks, first of all, the Chinese government, not just them, the Turkish government, the Canadian government, and the Australian government as well, because they've been sending in aid regularly. They're making sure that whatever they can contribute and however they can contribute in this time of distress for the Pakistani people, they're doing so. So a rich tribute to all of those nations who have come together to help us.
That's very true, and I think we also need to, thank towards the Arab brethren, because the people of the UAE, people of Saudi Arabia who have been very forthcoming in supporting us, and not just that, I think the expat communities who very generously supported, our relief and rehabilitation activities. And now, moving on to our topic, which is about the flooding and the climate change and how it is very disproportionately affecting us. So I would like to quote Mrs. Sherry Rahman here, because I'm really inspired by the way she talks. Yes. So, she also says in the Berlin conference on the climate change that climate change is the modernity's broken promise if we do not do much on that. And I do feel very passionately about this statement, because that's very true. As I've mentioned before, we have witnessed flooding, we have witnessed gulfs, we have witnessed the wildfires. I think the two weathers, the autumn and spring, has been completely eliminated this year. Right. And I do remember, Shehzad, that we have such a fond memories of Islamabad, where the flowers were blooming, but they are no more here because of the excessive heat. And now we have the excessive water inside our country, and we do not have the capacity to absorb it because it has been so much violent. So, to explore more about it and to talk about the rehabilitation activities and what can be done to, rehabilitate our brethren who are in need, who are in distress, we have a very amazing personality in the studio who's going to debrief us about such kind of activities. So I'm very glad that we have been joined by Ahmed Kamal Saab, who happens to be the Chief Engineer Advisor. He's also the Chairman of the Federal Flood Commission, and he also happens to be associated with the Ministry of Water Resources. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Thank you, PTV, for giving me this opportunity to talk and to share my views.
And sir, it's wonderful to have you over here, to be very honest, because the world, in fact, has got an eye on you. Everybody's looking forward to you, and we certainly pray that we get a few more gentlemen or women like you and the knowledge you possess.
Allah is great, and I pray that we are given the strength that we can do good for the nation.
But sir, at the same time, the kind of job you're supposed to do in these times of distress brings a lot of pressure. And no matter what happens, obviously it is about the lives of millions of people. It is about the broken infrastructure. So before we actually ask you a question, I would want to ask you whether how did it all occur? And when we talk about climate change, how do you think that climate change is only limited to within the area of Pakistan, not alongside the borders or across the borders? And what do you think will be the effects of climate change in the coming years?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I would like to first talk on what happened during this monsoon season. We all know that the Pakistan Met Department had a forecast made with regard to above normal rainfall, and they had a forecast of about 25 to 35% above normal. This year, the monsoon trend was altogether different. It used to be from north to south. This time it is from south to north. It started in Balochistan, and then it has an impact on urban areas in the province of Sindh, followed by southern part, and then the southern Punjab portion was heavily hit by probably this was beyond unprecedented, the flow that was generated in the hill torrent areas of DG Khan on both sides, and then it was followed by a sudden outburst of rainfall on the 25th and the 26th in the upper areas, which ultimately resulted in damage to some major structures, as well as so much of people get stranded as well as displaced. With regard to what is happening to this region in general and to Pakistan in particular, let me share with you that after 2010 floods there was a research made, and that research had indicated that the monsoon trend has shifted from northeast to northwest of Pakistan, and it has brought additional 80 to 100 kilometers of area into its focus. And by virtue of that, our additional 25 districts came under its impact, of which 14 were in Punjab and 11 are in the province of KP. So, having said that, at that time we had a study also undertaken which brought out that if a scale of this much of catastrophe came again, it is going to have an impact of about 15 to more than $15 billion to our economy, or more than 40% of our PSDP is going to be impacted. Let me share with you that now with regard to the climate change, it is more than 100% visible on ground. Now, the studies have shown that the sea surface temperature of the Bay of Bengal is more than the sea surface temperature, the sea surface temperature of the Arabian Sea is more than the sea surface temperature of Bay of Bengal, and that has resulted in the continuous progression of cyclonic activity towards the coast of Pakistan and to Oman. You may like to go back that in 2007 we have got the Fate cyclone, followed by Yamjin, Ashoba, Nilofer, and many other cyclones that had an impact on our coastal line. So, all these things have shown that we are coming from both sides, not only from the north, but also from the south, in the grip of that sort of a climate change, which otherwise is not because of our, you can say, foolies, or what should I say. We are probably 135 number as far as the carbon emissions are concerned, but probably now every one of us know that what that melting is happening, why that melting is happening of our glaciers, because our glaciers have got very strong deposition of carbon on it. By virtue of that, they have gone grey to black, and grey or black is much more heat, you can say, absorbent as compared to white. That's and by virtue of that, the heat is retained underground, and that promotes the internal melting activity, and ultimately the glof and all that. So,
and sir, a very simple understanding for the people, because when COVID actually break out, and when it was announced that it's a pandemic, and that people really need to be careful, the industries were shutting down. So within a matter of, I think, 3 or 4 months, we started to see clear skies. The globe, the globe, or in fact our planet wasn't really that hot. And as soon as post-COVID we come out over here and we see natural calamities occurring. So imagine how prone, because of these carbon emissions, do you think Pakistan will be in coming years to all of these natural calamities and disasters?
Let me share with you that if this situation goes on, this is probably the first indicator for us this year. And the sort of a incident happened in the northern areas with regard to cloud burst and all that. It can happen many times in a single monsoon season, and it can cause so much of a devastation. And the only you can say the only resistance to that is that we should be much more prepared with regard to taking much more adaptive action. We should go in the international, you can say, conferences and all that, and press the international community that the pledges that they have made with regard to putting in 100 billion or more than 100 billion in the adaptation fund and all that, we are the one who should be getting the major part of that. Now, how far we are going to be waiting for that if such sort of a calamity happens again. Being a student of this field for the last 32, 33 years, let me share with you that I saw the 1992 flood in Pakistan in the Jhelum River, and then in 97, 98, and then many others, and the 2010 as well. This is something beyond, you can say, even imagination. and it was not a fast, folding. It was a slow onset flood, unfolding every day, and the things are coming on ground again and again. And as you have asked about for the future, the Met Office has said that there is a likelihood that the second half of this month, September, maybe from 15th onwards for maybe 6-7 days or so, there is a possibility of yet another, you can say, system, which for the time being, we don't know how heavy it is going to be. But there is, if that indication is there, and there is so much of bad or damages on ground, we are required to be much more careful for that.
That's very true, and thank you so much for mentioning that, because I do feel for now we do have a sort of a temporary respite from the monster monsoon, because we can cope up with that. So in the meanwhile, how do you think, and how much do you think it's important to invest in the early warning system when it comes to that? Because going out and knocking on the doors of the people that it's going to be a flash flood and then you need to leave. So instead we can invest in some sort of local government sort of a system where we can install the early warning system. So what is your assessment on that?
Yes, I should say that after 2010 floods, there have been some efforts, but those efforts were not enough. There have been some projects on ground, but delays and all that. One good project, that is GLOF 2, that is being implemented in the northern areas. It is purely sort of a community based program. By virtue of that, about 10 districts or 12 districts, both in Upper KP and in JB, they are going to be, the early warning system is going to be connected with the population. So that sort of a system is required in Balochistan, in the lower part of the Sindh, and probably in AJK as well. Allow me one more point to talk. When this all happened on ground, there was a fear that more than 700,000 cusics of water is going to come downstream at Khairabad, and there will be heavy flooding of more than 700,000 cusics or even 750,000 cusics towards Tonsa, Gudu, Sakhar and Kotri. I must appreciate, I must acknowledge a very excellent sort of a reservoir management done by the Tarbela Dam Management Organization as well as the Chashma Dam Management Organization, who cut short that peak from 700 to, you can say, 500 or less than 500,000 cusics, and that is going on for the time being. It is going to continue for next 3 or 4 days, maybe 5 days, but it is not going to have that much of, inshallah, impact, which otherwise we we were fearing to have that.
Exactly, and we can even keep that as an example for the other places and probably protect people this way, and this needs to be the way forward. But sir, now I want to ask you that from the 25th onwards, we've been talking about it, and we certainly, people did not had the idea that it's going to be so massive and destructive, and such calamity is actually going to displace 33 million or more people. So, and Ms. Sherry Rahman even said that it's one big ocean. We cannot even pump the water out. So it is a difficult time. But the rescue operation, alhamdulillah, is being completed, and I want to ask you that whether it is completed or not, and rich tribute to Pakistan Armed Forces and for every brother or sister who's actually kind of representing the government or probably an NGO or anybody else, because you were out there to help, so our prayers go out for you too as well. So the rescue operation is completed. If yes or no, and if it's a yes, then are we moving on towards rehabilitation? One
important thing for this nation, whatever the situation, when there is a sort of a disaster, this nation becomes like that. Everyone. So salute to that thing. Number 2, yes, our armed forces, the 3 armed Pakistan Army, Navy and Pakistan Air Force, National Disaster Management Authority, Provincial Disaster Management Authority, Rescue 1122, and for that very reason, in the private sector, people working in the private sector, they had been quite, you can say, instrumental now, and whatever the reports that I have got, probably there is a very little left with regard to rescue or regard to moving out the people who were stranded somewhere. And for that, I should say that as a way for the future, we are required to have a very strong SOPs for our northern areas. We are required to implement our river law in our entire river system, so that there should not be any encroachments on our river side. There is a right of way for the river, which is being encroached, and that resulted in so much of evacuations and all.
And sir, this is a role which needs to be played by the local government.
By the local government.
Right. And Mrs. Sherry Rahman, I also want to quote her. She said that we need better planning and sustainable development on the ground, and we need more climate resilient crops and structures. So can you elaborate on the climate resilient crops and structures part of that?
Very important issue. So far we have been much more giving emphasis on the engineering structures, but we must not now forget the social aspect of that. Wherever the communities are at a very specific localized condition, we must bring in the green construction aspects also. Not I'm not discouraging the grey construction, but it should also be followed by the green structures. With regard to crops and all that, again I will quote that after 2010 floods, the study indicated that there is a very marked change in our climate pattern. So we are required to think over that, where there is no water, what crop we can change the cropping pattern. We should consider towards that. Another important thing is, in our river system, all over the year, some of the rivers are totally without water, and 3 months there is a lot of water there. So we should start thinking about how well the environmental flows in our rivers are considered, and maybe in future how well we take certain measures to ensure those environmental flows, to bring in all the biodiversity revamping and all that. That is immensely required. One of the issues in that, I will take just a half a minute for that. Innovative approaches towards flood management is, whenever there is a very heavy flows, we are required to create some sort of artificial wetlands. We should take that water to those areas, or you can say channels. We should store the water there. That is ultimately going to bring the groundwater above, as well as it is going to stop the migration of the people from that particular area, because of that looming sort of a threat of this disaster is going to come again and again, and then it is going to bring in so much of liveliness to that area. There is a project towards that. Probably
very importantly, that you mentioned, and you're talking about the green agriculture and the green economy and the green recovery, and I do think that as an because we are a very agrarian economy, and we need to invest more in the positive or the green economy, green agriculture, because when you squeeze out nature is going to create its way, and very aggressively, and this is what we are seeing in the form of the floodings, in the form of the climate change. So very quickly we will go on a short break, and after that we're going to talk more about the green recovery.
So thank you very much, sir, for being in conversation with us, and for everybody who is out there. Ladies and gentlemen, it was an honor for us to actually host Mr. Malik Sahab over here, because he happens to be the chairman for the Federal Flood Commission. Thank you very much. Stay with us. We will definitely talk about it further. Good morning.
Welcome back. And earlier on, before going on to the break, we were talking about the green recovery, and as my colleague wants to, very aptly, put in that I'm very specific about the green recovery when it comes to that. Of course, we need that because why we are very affected by the climate change. We are affected by the flooding. We are affected by the wildfires, by the vanishing of the two seasons that we used to cherish. And, we used to say that it's a very diverse sort of a country because we have 4 seasons when it comes to that. But we see that sort of thing is vanishing. So, very quickly to talk more about it, I'm going to introduce my guest because one of our guests happens to be Dr. Shahid Zia, who happens to be environmentalist, and he's on the Skype. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Wonderful to have you. And not just that, I think alongside Shahid Zia Saab, we're lucky enough that we've been joined by another environmentalist over here in the studios with us. He happens to be Dr. Ejaz Ahmed. Hello, sir. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. So we've spoken quite a lot with Mr. Ahmed Kamal Saab. He's told us, the way Pakistan has been engulfed by a disaster, which happens to be a natural calamity. Now, you as an environmentalist, this is a question which I posed to him too, that in near future, because the international community might not even listen to the way we've been hurt, we've been damaged, our assets have been damaged, and it will take a little longer for them to kind of come together and realize that it is not Pakistani-made disaster, rather a global disaster made by the people globally and the nations globally. How do you think in near future things are going to turn out in terms of climate change when we talk about Pakistan?
I think generally there is a recognition now that this is not something that is because what we do in Pakistan. True. It is beyond that. And even UN Secretary General has actually mentioned that this is something that we globally there is issue related to environmental degradation, and that has impacted various countries and impacted very badly to Pakistan.
Exactly.
So as far as like future is concerned, I think still it seems that the things they are going to be almost at the same level, and it may actually increase. I was reading an article which says that maybe in the September will be quite hot actually, and there are also some prediction that maybe there is a possibility of one more spell like that. And this is actually going on for many years. I mean, like we have been facing these issues little or more of the same
one way or the other. It has been happening. So let me move back to Shahid Zia Saab. Shahid Saab, now what I need to ask you is that, okay, it will take us a little time to kind of convince the international community that, hey, you know what, you really need to kind of control, and it is going to be a longer time period for all of those people to come together. What we as a nation do you think can do to divert or kind of save ourselves from such drastic changes which has had impact in terms of climate change?
What I would say that though global community is understanding what's going on in Pakistan, and this is a disaster of a scale where global community need to put together their efforts together to handle it. No country alone can do with such a large scale destruction. But what I'm saying is that trying to say that in Pakistan, Alhamdulillah, Pakistani community, right from the villages to the cities, they are collecting support items and then trying to support their fellow communities who are affected by the flood. That is very good, and we need to channelize it. Now people are asking where we can send it. Those who wanted to go there, set up camp and do some health camp and early relief activities, they lack information where they can go, and there's a little sort of crisis of coordination, I would say, that people should know from where they can get this information, where more help is needed at this time, where the people are already there helping the people who need help. That kind of activity should also come from from the districts, but there should be some central coordination as we used to do during the 2005 earthquake. That's one thing that I feel lack, because I received a message late last night from Dr. Usama Kazi. He's from Ahmedabad, and they are stranded in Kumrat forest. There are about 250 to 300 people there, but I even don't know from where I can send this message for immediate support to those 250 to
Sir,
300
double one
people
three five
stranded
and
over
double
there.
one two five.
That
These are the
kind of
helplines. We have been
information.
giving away these helplines regularly. So I think मैं उर्दू में भी एक दफ़ा कहना चाहूँगा कि मैंने पिछले हफ्ते से मैं रोज़ आके ये जिक्र करता हूँ प्रोग्राम में कि 1135 एक जेनेरिक हेल्पलाइन है जो पाकिस्तान आर्मी की हेल्पलाइन है। उसके ऊपर अगर आप कहीं पे भी फंसे हुए हैं, जितने भी लोग जो मुझे सुन रहे हैं, आप लोग कॉल करके उनको बता सकते हैं। लेकिन ऑब्वियसली जो लोग पहले से ही स्ट्रैंडेड होंगे, सैलाब में बिजली जहाँ पे नहीं होगी, फ़ोन के कनेक्शंस नहीं होंगे, उनको मेरा पैगाम नहीं जा रहा, लेकिन आप ये पैगाम आगे मजीद पहुँचा सकते हैं। और 1125 जो है वो KP के सेंट्रिक हेल्पलाइन है पाकिस्तान आर्मी की। तो कोई भी कहीं पे भी फंसा है, मैं एक दफ़ा फिर से दोबारा आई एम गोइंग टू अर्ज टू पीपल दैट प्लीज़ मेक श्योर दैट यू शेयर दिस मैसेज। 1135 एंड 1125 दो हेल्पलाइंस हैं जिस पे सब कॉल कर सकते हैं, और जहाँ पे भी खुदा न खास्ता आप फंसे हुए होंगे, लोग आपको आके ले जाएंगे। जी जी सर, आप हमारे साथ सर प्लीज stay with us on the line. I want to move on to Dr. Ejaz Sahab over here. So now, Dr. Ejaz Sahab, what do you think, in your point of view, needs to be the strategy for Pakistan in coming years? Because this is for real. You know, from 2010, we might have acted like a pigeon, closed our eyes, and never looked back again. But this has become a reality. Climate change is going to be here for longer than what we thought.
I think what we need to do is walk the talk.
Right.
We have been talking a lot, and in 2010 and even after, there were disasters, but the intensity may not be to that extent, but still we learned a lot, and there were many documentation, there were many strategies which were developed. Now it is time to actually open the books and see what we committed and what we wanted to do in order to protect. And there are ways which have, and there are certain actions which have been taken. For example, in Lahore, I mean, like these massive water tanks with the capacity of 45 million gallons actually have been constructed, which actually stored quite good amount of water, which otherwise would have gone into the streets and created a massive destruction. So I think there are already various prescriptions which are available, and we need to actually look into that and then start working on it. And one thing which is very important, we always say that this is these disasters are related to the kind of like effects of climate change which are going on. So whatever we do, we have to look into the green recovery and rehabilitation. And there are ways globally, there are various instruments which are available. We need to just look into those instruments. We need to look into those tools which are important in order to reduce these kind of disaster in future. And also, see, if we go for infrastructure, it has to be a green infrastructure, so that environment is also supported through these,
and we've been talking about all of those measures which can be taken. Even Hajar has been talking about it. Ahmed Kamal Sahab earlier spoke about it as well. I want to move back to Dr. Shahid Zia Sahab. Shahid Sahab, now what I need to ask you is that we live in a country where almost 3 months ago we were talking about water scarcity. We were talking about that how there is not enough water for us to use for our future generations, and how we really need to be a responsible citizen. Now imagine all of a sudden in 3 months time we're talking about a country where 33 million people have been affected by floods. Which way are we headed? So let's have a very clear vision at least that, once we have a talk, obviously we're talking about water scarcity. The other time we come together, and talk about what's happening due to climate change with environmentalists. I mean, it's a confused state of mind for us, for Pakistanis, and the direction can only be sorted when we have clarity in our mind. So Shahid Sahab, what would you want to say on that?
I remember I said in your program that we are either we are the country where we live in drought or under the water.
True.
So that's a management, grossly mismanagement of our water resources. What we, as you asked the previous question, I will link it to that. The cheapest way of addressing the flood situation is either diversions or drainage. Unfortunately, our drainage infrastructure is grossly inadequate. But if you look at that 75% of that in Sindh is choked already because of the people constructed for farmhouses or some kind of housing societies over there. But the 3/4 of the drainage structure is choked. That's why Sindh is suffering more from the flood than the other areas. In Punjab, these structures are functional a little bit, but still need a lot of improvements, and then more structures need to be put in. This is the cheapest way of doing the flood, reducing the risk of flood damages. And after the flood, we are facing that. I didn't know any other country that takes that long to reseed the water from the affected areas. If that only we can do through the drainage, and or the way that the water takes back to the river flow, river bed area, that time needs to be reduced due to through planning and investment. Now for droughts, only the storage that can help us. If we build storage of floodwater, I'll again say, because in normal days, rivers flow on their capacity and are sometimes very little flow over there, so that there are some confusions within the provinces about the sort of distribution of water. Under the flood, everyone would like that upstream areas, if they store water, the downstream areas will suffer less. So we need to have a storage for flood waters. And I reiterate that there are many areas within Pakistan, they have natural storage like Ravi, Satluj, Beas river beds, where we can make them as a storage, divert flood water to those rivers, and then store and then use.
Point taken. That's a wonderful point that you mentioned. That's a wonderful point that you mentioned, that that we really need to assess that where the flood water is coming from, and have the flood water storages over there rather than coming down the stream and then kind of going after what we really need to do in terms of a catastrophe. But thank you very much, sir, for being with us. Lovely to be in conversation with you, and thank you very much for a very efficient and applicable idea. Dr. Saab, very quickly towards the end, we only might have 30 seconds or 40 seconds for the answer, but what would you suggest in these times of distress?
I think, as mentioned earlier, we need to consider environment as one of the most important factor during the rehabilitation work, during the any recovery work, because if we don't consider environment, another disaster will come.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for being with us. Lovely to be in conversation with you. Just one small observation. Just yesterday, I saw this rescue operation going on. In fact, donations were being provided and flood relief packages were given to people from the helicopter. And this gentleman who's put up this video, he said that as soon as you drop those packages, they burst out and there's nothing left out of these packages too. So for all of those places where we can actually go by road, I think it's better that we donate or, reach out to all of those people or bring those flood relief packages, so that they can actually take advantage of it, because as soon as those flower packages were dropped, they burst out and there was nothing left for them to take or use it. So please make sure that be a little more responsible rather than using a helicopter. If you can reach out to people by land, that will be a wonderful idea. Make sure that you donate 10 rupees if you feel like it, by texting 9999. Not just that, there's a Prime Minister Flood Relief Fund, G12164 is the account number. Please make sure that you donate generously. Till the next time, look after yourselves.
It's a goodbye.